The American military sought to carry out an island hopping campaign in the Central Pacific during the Second World War. The overall objective of the campaign was to advance from the Gilbert Islands to the Marshall Islands and then on to the Mariana Islands across the Central Pacific so that we could capture Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. The reason those three islands were targeted specifically was so that the U.S. could then build advanced airfields on those islands, airfields where we could base the B-29 bomber. In carrying out that campaign, we eventually do capture those islands during the summer of 1944, although at great cost. We then move our bombers there, and the bombers begin flying those combat missions. But there was recognition early on that it was not desirable for us to send B-29s in toward targets in Japan unescorted. We sought, therefore, to capture an advanced airfield where our shorter-range fighters could be based. The fighters could then take off, fly in escort with the bombers, protecting the bombers as they delivered bombs to targets in the Japanese home islands. Then the fighters could fly back a shorter distance and land at an airfield close by. The only island that made sense for this fighter base was Iwo Jima, a volcanic island and a group of islands called Ogasawara. Iwo Jima would be targeted, but it meant something that none of the other battles before it meant, because Iwo Jima was technically part of the prefecture, or in other words, think of it as like a state or district within Japan. So by landing on Iwo Jima, we're technically beginning to land in the Japanese home islands.
The ground assault on Iwo Jima began on February 19, 1945, with an opposed amphibious landing by two Marine divisions. The 4th Marine Division landed on the right, and the 5th Marine Division landed on the left, on the beaches directly behind me. Their immediate objective after coming ashore was to push across the island to its west coast, isolating Mount Suribachi. And then reinforced with the 3rd Marine Division, they were to swing to the north, overrun the airfields, and eliminate all Japanese resistance on the island. When we think of Iwo Jima, we think of a Marine victory. And that's because U.S. Marines like Tony Stein and John Basilone, who both sacrificed their lives on this island, they created legends that we still remember to this very day. But it's also important to remember that every branch of the American military was a part of this battle and fought for this black sand. Not only was the Marine Corps here, but the Army was here, the Coast Guard was here, and of course the United States Navy was here. And that's where my personal connection to Iwo Jima comes into the picture. Because my grandfather, Chief Carpenter's mate Joe Wilson Morgan, he was here, a U.S. Navy Seabee.
The battle for Iwo Jima is perhaps the most significant point in Marine Corps history, not only in the Pacific War, but really in Marine Corps history. It gave us that incredible image of the flag raising. It really cemented the Marine Corps' role in the American psyche. And it's an incredible tradition based on a lot of blood. Iwo Jima had space for 3 airfields on it. There's nothing on Iwo Jima except rock, sulfur, and sparse vegetation. There was no civilians. It was simply an island set up for airfields, for early air warning.
The circumstances by early 1945 were such that the Japanese Navy just could not do anything to support the garrison on the island. The American Navy at this stage was so vast and so powerful that the Japanese Navy couldn't do anything. That doesn't mean that what was on the island could not put up one heck of a fight, because they certainly did. Beginning on February 19, 1945, American forces begin landing, spearheaded by the 5th Marine Amphibious Corps, with 2 Marine divisions landing, the 4th and the 5th. We remember this battle today in association with the famous photograph that was taken by Joe Rosenthal, February 23, 1945, a photograph taken on the 4th day of a battle that would last for 36 days, a photograph that became the image of the 7th War Bond Drive. And that famous Iwo Jima photograph remains one of the most powerful images of the 20th century to this day. And it provides only a small glimpse into the fighting on an island that was only 8 square miles. 8 square miles upon which about 30,000 human beings lost their lives in 1945.
Want to know what's happening at American Rifleman? Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. We'll be right back.
Visiting Iwo Jima is not something that's all that easily accomplished. The U.S. military occupied it through the late 1960s, but then turned it over to the Japanese government. By treaty agreement, Americans are allowed to visit the island only 1 day per year for the purposes of a joint memorial service. And that memorial service is typically timed to coincide with the anniversary of the end of the battle, not the beginning of it. And so it's a rare privilege indeed to be given the opportunity to come to this place where, in 5 weeks at the beginning of 1945, the war in the Pacific reached a level of violence and desperation that we had just not seen before. Over 6,800 Americans made the ultimate sacrifice on this island 71 years ago. And it's for that reason that Iwo Jima today is sacred ground.
The Japanese commander at Iwo Jima had seen what had happened throughout the Pacific War, and really culminating in the Marianas with this idea of this bonsai attack and try to drive the invader back into the sea, and it wasn't working. And basically a lot of Japanese soldiers and seamen, Marines, were dying trying to do just this. Japanese commander on Iwo Jima looked at it and said, we have an opportunity here with these coral rock to burrow in, make use of the natural caves, enlarge these, and put in an entire network and system of caves that you can hide an entire army in there and just keep a battle of attrition. And this was the idea. And it was a meat grinder.
Ronaldo Martini was a section leader with the machine gun company of the 27th Marines when on the 19th of February, 1945, he invaded Iwo Jima during one of the largest and most heavily contested fights of the Pacific War. As Martini and his men moved inland, they encountered stiff resistance from a well-fortified Japanese pillbox. His whole unit was pinned down and the situation looked pretty hopeless. There was no offshore artillery fire, no tanks, nothing to take out the horrendous machine gun fire that was coming from this Japanese bunker. But Martini was a better man than the guys that he was fighting against. He stood up, took his machine gun, firing from the hip, walked straight into the mouth of the pillbox, firing the entire time. This took out the initial Japanese defenders, scattered them, and allowed a demolitions guy to come up behind him and take out the pillbox with high explosives. For his actions and intrepidity that day on February 19th, 1945 on Iwo Jima, Sergeant Martini was awarded the United States Silver Star.
The fighting on Iwo Jima was some of the roughest, probably the roughest the United States Marine Corps has ever faced. And some of that fighting was in very close proximity. And one example of just how close and how nasty that fighting was Sergeant William George Harrell. He was a sergeant in the 28th Marines, and he and another Marine were assigned to a two-man foxhole. This is a very crucial position because if the Japanese came through, they'd be right at the command post. The two men were posted there for the night. They beat off constant Japanese attacks, and his comrade had a jam with his personal weapon, had to go back and get another one. Well, while he was gone, the Japanese managed to get a grenade into the foxhole, and that grenade took off the left hand of Sergeant Harrell. His buddy came back, they repulsed another attack, and instead of being evacuated, Sergeant Harrell continued to fight. But talk about bad luck. His comrade had to go and get another rifle because that gun was malfunctioning. By the time his comrade got back, the Japanese had managed to put another grenade into the foxhole, removing the right hand of Sergeant Harrell. He was subsequently evacuated, and on October 5th, 1945, he was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman.
The battle for Iwo Jima was 24 days of sheer hell. The number of casualties the Marine Corps took was just absolutely staggering, and was really a testament to the Japanese abilities as riflemen, which up until this point had been fairly well discounted in American propaganda, that the Japanese infantrymen really couldn't shoot. Well, he could shoot, and could shoot well enough to inflict these casualties as the Marines secured the beaches, secured Mount Suribachi, and then started moving across the island to take these airfields going up finally to the northern part of the island. But it was 24 days when the original, very optimistic plan had been for just a matter of days.